But basically, neurodivergent would be anything outside the realm of what is deemed neurotypical. So it's just a different way of thinking. Your brains may be a little bit different than others. So for autism, it's usually looked at as restrictive and repetitive behaviors or difficulties with social communication. So it might be difficulty with making eye contact, or maybe they have very rigid routines and they don't like a lot of change. For ADHD, there's the inattentive type, and then there's the hyperactive impulsive, and then there's also kind of that combined. The inattentive would be like difficulty paying attention, where the hyperactive impulsive might be more like fidgeting or interrupting others or those types of things. And with learning disabilities, it's a little bit more broad. It depends on what area they have those issues. So I think often people think of dyslexia, which is more of a reading-based learning disability. I have ADHD myself. I went through grad school, hearing from others and also my own experience. You get different levels of people giving you a hard time, or they kind of stereotype your behaviors as being kind of negative. So for someone who's autistic, if there's like a big change all of a sudden in their routine or schedule at work, it might be challenging for them. Or maybe they don't make as much eye contact and other people kind of view that as rude. Maybe there is like really loud noise or very bright lights and they're having trouble kind of doing their work because they're finding that overstimulating. For ADHD, a lot of times maybe you'll have a harder time listening in a meeting, maybe you're doodling, something like that. People think you're not paying attention and they get annoyed. Or if you get really excited about something, maybe you interrupt someone before they're done speaking. That's also can be seen as rude. Maybe they're having trouble with time management skills or with kind of some of those executive functioning skills, so it's harder for them to meet targets and deadlines. And if you have a learning disability, maybe if you have to do a lot of reading in your job and your learning disability is related to that, then you would see that it might take them longer to read or to get through things. But with the appropriate supports, a lot of these things can kind of be mitigated. I think that there is a lot of stigma about how people present and how it may affect their workplace. I did a study where I interviewed people with ADHD and asked them what they think the strengths, weaknesses, and associated stigma are. And a lot of them said that they don't tell anyone at their workplace that they have ADHD because they're worried that people will think that they're incapable, that they think they are stupid, and they think that they're using their ADHD as an excuse. I think that a lot of employers may be unsure, but I think a lot of times this is coming from this like inherent bias against people that are neurodivergent and not always a result of neurodivergent themselves.
La raison pour laquelle c'est difficile de démontrer la discrimination à l'égard des personnes neurodivergentes, c'est que pour arriver à conclure, il faut que la personne elle-même revendique d'être discriminée. Puis ça, il y a une implication aussi personnelle éventuellement difficile de vouloir s'associer ou de vouloir s'identifier comme personne neurodivergente. Puis entre autres, pour avoir droit à un accommodement raisonnable, il faut l'avoir demandé. Donc il faut avoir reconnu soi-même qu'on doit pouvoir bénéficier d'un accommodement raisonnable. Donc ça, des fois, ça peut être difficile pour les personnes qui sont victimes de discrimination de prendre ce chemin-là. On définit la discrimination comme une distinction, une exclusion ou une préférence qui est fondée sur un des motifs de discrimination qui est énuméré dans la charte puis qui compromet l'exercice d'un autre droit. Quand on est dans une relation d'emploi, il y a 3 temps majeurs où on peut voir la discrimination. On la voit à l'embauche, on la voit aussi dans les conditions de travail, ou ça pourrait être aussi par le refus d'accommodement raisonnable, c'est-à-dire refuser de donner des conditions de travail qui permettent à la personne de faire son travail sur un pied d'égalité avec les autres. La façon dont une personne peut identifier la discrimination, c'est si elle récolte des informations ou elle récolte des preuves qu'elle a un traitement différencié. Les sanctions qui sont appliquées par les tribunaux dans un contexte de discrimination sont très larges. Il y a beaucoup de possibilités. La Charte donne beaucoup de possibilités aux juges. Donc, le juge peut prendre en fait toute mesure pertinente. Par exemple, imposer à l'employeur de réembaucher un salarié, lui imposer de mettre en place des mesures d'accommodement raisonnables, lui imposer de payer des dommages et intérêts aussi éventuellement. Puis il peut même imposer à l'employeur de suivre une formation et de faire suivre à tous ses employés une formation. Les obligations légales des employeurs vont varier en fonction de leur situation spécifique. Ça rend très difficile la description des accommodements raisonnables ou la compréhension. C'est très difficile pour les employeurs qui ont à l'occasion l'obligation de mettre en œuvre l'accommodement raisonnable. Donc, un employeur doit faire tout ce qu'il peut pour permettre à la personne en situation de handicap de travailler au meilleur de ses capacités jusqu'à une contrainte excessive pour lui. Quand l'entreprise est très grande, c'est plus facile pour l'employeur de le faire. Mais si c'est une petite entreprise, par exemple, si on parle du dépanneur du coin où il y a juste 3 employés, ça devient plus difficile pour l'employeur, par exemple, d'arranger les horaires pour que le travailleur puisse consulter son médecin ou participer à avoir accès à des traitements particuliers, etc., etc.
If they have difficulties with something like time management, then maybe they're having a harder time kind of reaching deadlines. But as like a manager, one thing you could do is break down the projects into smaller steps or give more internal deadlines, even just for the first couple of projects while they get the hang of it. Employers can make the workplace a little more neurodivergent friendly by talking with their employees one-on-one about different strategies that may be helpful to help them accomplish and get through with their goals. Maybe if you have a learning disability, again, like reading, maybe getting a reading or writing software to kind of help. But sometimes people see that as like preferential treatment if you're getting some level of support. But it's really to just help that person succeed. I've also kind of heard from neurodivergent people in the workplace that they're more comfortable often in sharing that they're neurodivergent if there's other people that are neurodivergent in the workplace, especially those that might be higher positions than they are. So they can see it modeled and they see that it can be accepted and people work with them as opposed to against them. Because I think too, when I mentioned that I have ADHD, employers or something might be like, oh, she's not going to hit any of her deadlines or anything like that. That's not really been an issue. I'm super motivated and I really love what I do, and I think a lot of neurodivergent people do. They're really passionate about their work, and if we could kind of like work towards their strengths as opposed to only viewing their weaknesses, it'd be a lot better for everyone. If there's anyone that is openly neurodivergent in the workplace, they could talk with them about how to make the environment more inclusive, maybe put together a group. If no one in the workplace is currently comfortable, which may be the case, maybe you bring in outside consultants or advocates outside that could come in, do some education, maybe get everyone to kind of work together and think together about how to best support everyone and make sure that it's not looked down upon if someone asks for accommodations or needs some level of support.